So, our second lecture of Chapter 1, Introducing Earth Science. Sorry I went too far. We're going to talk about Earth system science. So, in that introductory discussion, we brought in all of the different spheres that make up Earth: the atmosphere, the biosphere, the geosphere, and the hydrosphere. Now, all of those different spheres interact with each other and influence each other. Now, understanding the relationships between them is what Earth system science is. So we're kind of just introducing what it is, more or less, right now. And then for the entire year, we will always try to bridge connections between the different parts of the Earth. Even when we're just strictly looking at geology or whatever, we're going to talk about how the hydrosphere, Earth's water, influences geologic processes. And we'll talk about perhaps how the atmosphere can influence them too. And then obviously people influence all parts of the Earth. So that will always be there as well. To understand how a planet changes, scientists look at all of the variables, and we call that Earth system science. Now, you cannot truly understand how something works unless you understand how all of its moving parts work. Because there may just be so much stuff under the surface hidden from influence that you don't know exactly what the cause is. And by understanding it, we can better control what's going on, modify our environment to protect us or to make it more productive, or whatever. So this is like a case study. What we have here is ice in the Arctic Ocean. Now, some of this ice has been turned over, and you can see it looks dirty. But what that is actually is it's algae. It clings to the surface of the ice. Now, the oceans are vast, and it's a 3D habitat. On land, everything pretty much lives on the surface, but in the water, you got miles worth of habitat. So the volumes of life in the ocean dwarf what's on land by massive scales. Now on land, what is everything ultimately dependent upon for food? Well, that would be the plants, the grasses and trees and edibles around. Now even a carnivore that doesn't eat plants, well, its food eats plants. So that is where it all begins. So you take any habitat on Earth, and the majority of the living material, we call that biomass, is always we call them producers, organisms that photosynthesize, whatever, and they support everything else. Now in the oceans, sunlight can only penetrate so far, so it's not like we got stuff growing way down at the bottoms. Where we have shallow coasts, we have kelp that maybe is anchored at the base, but that's in not very deep water. So this algae here, the snow or the ice here is kind of like the soil that the algae grows on. Now without that, now we'll actually move on and take a look here. Under the surface, it might be pretty hard for you to see, but these are little tiny, they're called krill. They're little crustaceans. They look like small shrimp, and they're probably one of the most numerous animals on the planet. Their numbers are in the trillions, we would probably estimate. Now, pretty much their entire diet is that algae stuff that grows under there. Now, they in turn then support the majority of the food chains around. A blue whale, the largest animal that's ever existed, they can weigh up to, I want to say 120 tons, but it may actually be even more than that. This 100-foot-long blue whale, its entire diet is these types of things. It's absolutely microscopic animals. So they're very important. Smaller fish eat them as well, and then maybe sharks eat those fish that eat these little tiny things. So it all begins here. Well, what's been going on? Now, this is just strictly the hydrosphere and the cryosphere, but in the last several decades, the amount of ice that is, now if you look at the North Pole, during winter, the ice cap it grows. There's no land up here. There's just some islands in Greenland. So that's all water underneath this ice. There's no land mass. During the winter that grows, and in the summer it shrinks. Well, we've been tracking in the summer, what's the minimum amount of ice left in the summer? And over the last several decades, it's been shrinking. This is what it was in 1979. This is what it was a little more 11 years ago. So far less of it is there. That algae that we see on the surface here, it doesn't grow just floating in the ocean, or if it does, it doesn't grow very successfully, or not as much of it grows. So all of a sudden, it's like we've ripped out, you can think of that as the rainforest, and we've just ripped out that much of it. Well, there goes the base of the food chain, or a giant chunk of the base of the food chain. So we are pretty sure that human activity is accelerating this melting that's going on. It's driving up temperatures on our planet. Well, then the next question is, okay, who cares? Well, this is Alaska over here. When this kind of thing happens, what do you think the numbers of schools of fish do? They drop by quite a lot. How important do you think fishing is to the economy of Alaska? It's extremely important. After oil, it's probably in their top 5. Natural resources and oil, I'm sure, make up spots 1, 2, maybe 3, but fishing is probably way up there. So we shouldn't just kind of destroy people's way of life for them to make a living. You could toss out the argument that, well, technology will change and they'll just find something better to do, or that's what progress looks like, yada, yada, yada. Well, is that progress to ruin people's way of life? I mean, never mind the fact that it devastates the life down there. I think that maybe we should focus on species other than just ourselves. I think we can be a little less selfish in reality. But, I mean, there you go. So there's an example where human activity goes into the atmosphere, influences it, which interacts with the hydrosphere and cryosphere, influences it, and then that changes the biosphere as well. And then it comes back and affects us. So it's us affecting one thing, then another thing, then another thing, then another thing, and then it affects us too. Just as an example. So the definition for a system, we could say any size group of parts that, interacting parts that form a complex whole. It's like your car engine is a system. It's made of many moving parts. They each do only one specific job, but as a whole, they convert that mechanical motion into rotating tires, I guess. Most systems transfer matter and energy from one place to another. So your car gets its kinetic energy from igniting air and gas mixtures in its pistons, and then that turns a cam, I believe, and that makes your transmission rotate, then the drivetrain, and then boom, there you go. You're moving forward. There are two types of systems. A closed system does not allow any material in or out of it. So a closed system would be like, let's see, Earth's interior is kind of like a closed system. It's got all this heat, and that heat allows it to move around, and that's what breaks apart Earth's lithosphere. So it causes plate tectonics, it causes earthquakes. Now there's energy in there, but it's all self-contained energy. The sun doesn't dump its heat into the interior of the planet and keep it warm or anything like that. It's all self-contained. An open system freely lets material in and out of it. So if we think about the ways we generate electricity, besides fossil fuels, a wind turbine that captures wind energy and makes the wind turbine spin and generates electricity. Boom, it's getting it from an outside source. A hydroelectric dam, like those old-fashioned water mills, those are borrowing outside energy to make the system run. The vast majority, natural systems on Earth are open systems. Any process that goes on the surface is an open system. Now, obviously these don't work without a source of energy, so where does that energy come from to change the surface? Well, it comes from the sun. Without a sun, if we just deleted it all of a sudden, slowly, it wouldn't take all that long, but I mean, the entire planet would freeze over. Life would not be able to exist. Since there would be no more water cycle because there's nothing to evaporate water, the surface would slowly just kind of grind to a halt. Now, plate tectonics would keep going on. So here's the next thing. Earth's interior drives internal processes. So the Earth's surface would still change. It would shift around. If we came back after millions of years, the continents would be in different places. There would be no more green left on our Earth because most life would be extinct. Although on the bottoms of the oceans, where there are cracks in Earth's surface, where the water is superheated by internal material, we know that there are bacteria and things living there. So even some multi-celled life could probably thrive from that for a while. But everything on the surface, it's the sun. The weather, the biology on the surface, it's all thanks to the sun. So this is just an example of how those processes on the surface change a landscape. In the last lecture, we talked about Hawaii. Now, Hawaii has some of the most fertile soils on the planet. But remember how it's formed, it's just gobs of lava that spill up. If you've ever seen a lava field, it's just a black, random, lifeless area of basalt. That's what, when lava hardens, it turns into basalt rock. Well, where do you get the fertility from that? Well, it takes an incredibly long time, but lichens, which are like algae and moss mixed together, they break down that solid rock until you get really fine grains of dust and powder and things like that. Then eventually plants can take root in that. If there's water, like rain or whatever, then they can get the majority of the nutrients they need from that. They bleed it out of the actual rocks and minerals too. And then eventually it gets more complex, and then animals and stuff can live in there too. And that is energy from the sun driving all these processes, changing the surface of our planet all the time. The majority of it is incredibly slow, but it's constant. And humans play a very significant role in the Earth system. Our actions produce changes in virtually every single part of Earth systems, especially the atmosphere and the oceans. So pollution and global warming and removing non-renewable resources are some of our most significant influences. If we look at, so I don't know how good the quality will be, but this is a satellite picture of, where is this? I think it's upper South Dakota and North Dakota, which that would make this Fargo. I think that's what this is. Now, hopefully you can see the entire surface looks pixelated, or I don't know a better word for that, but it's not something that's wrong with the image. It's what it really looks like if you could be many hundreds of miles up above the surface looking down. Now, it should just be a uniform sea of green if it was the native area. But it's not. All this pixelation is farmland, and maybe I don't have a better picture, but I can't zoom in right now, but each of these little grids is a field. So it's been plowed. The native grasses or whatever grew there have been ripped out to be replaced with corn, soybeans, or whatever. Well, and I mean, from here to here is probably something like at least 150 miles. So same thing going up there. So this is well over 1,000 square miles of area that's been completely terraformed. I mean, we've ripped up the entire Midwest here. And this goes from Canada all the way down to Texas, and then it stretches many states wide. It's all farmland. So we've completely changed that area. And we do it only for our own benefit, really. This is just to grow food. if we, this is zoomed much further out. This is Minneapolis right here. This is Sioux Falls, Brookings, Watertown. This would maybe be like Rochester, I'm not exactly sure. But all these gray dots are cities. So again, a long time ago, you look at this, it would have just been a uniform sea of green. But we can see the roads in the cities, these gray areas. Our impact on this Earth is totally noticeable. Orbiting from space, you can see this. Here we see the Amazon rainforest. Now, many parts of it have not been touched. So if we look over here, you can see how, oh geez, I almost tripped on my computer cord. If we look over here, we can see how the dark green of this untouched rainforest is preserved. But if you can see these streaks right here where it's very light in color, what is that? Well, this is where we've been clearing the forest, and so these long streaks that, and they go for hundreds and hundreds of miles, those are just logging roads, and on either side of the streak we're cutting down trees for that. Now, right here, this has been totally clear cut. Millions of people live all throughout here, and all of the trees, or the vast majority of the trees, have been cut away. This deep green used to extend only 150 years ago. It extended over this entire light colored area. So in only 150 years, we've gotten rid of, in the Amazon, I think it's a little more than 20% of it. Well, that means in only a couple hundred years, is the entire thing going to be cut down? And if so, is that a good thing? Would it be good for us? Well, we're only doing it to maximize our own benefits. So if that's the consequence, then you could say, well, yeah, we got a lot out of it. But is that really the actual right thing to do? I mean, never mind if you don't care that we destroy habitat for animals and things like that. You know how much oxygen we get from those trees that are there? That's important as well. So, I don't know. This is right next to Salt Lake City. That's the largest surface copper mine in the world. There used to be an entire mountain there, like these, full of trees and animals and stuff, and we've completely eliminated that mountain for copper. Now, we need copper. It makes up all the electronics that make electricity possible. And I suppose we can spare one mountain, but it is kind of, I'm not really doing this to say shame on human beings for wrecking the environment. I'm just doing it to say that our impacts are noticeable and influential. Here's a bunch of garbage. It's been pretty popular in the mainstream science to talk about what we're going to do with especially our plastics. National Geographic dedicated an entire issue in June to the amount of plastic in the oceans, which is really disgusting if you look at how much of it there is. But this garbage, I mean, think about how many materials you consume and go through in a year, just one person. I mean, it's hundreds of pounds of stuff. Even the food we buy comes in plastic containers, most of it, and we just throw that away. And you can't do anything with plastic. And eventually, this mountain of garbage here, what do we do with it? It's not going to break down. I don't think we could burn it. We can't launch it off into outer space. Putting it in the oceans would be one of the worst things we can do. Like, what's going to happen when there are twice as many people on the planet as now? And could we run out of space for our garbage? Are we just going to have to live with it all around our cities? That's not ideal. And this is Shanghai, I think, in China. They have, so here it is on a good day, here it is on a bad day with smog, the air pollution. I mean, this kills people. It literally does. Millions of people every year die from pollution. Now, thanks to technology, we can treat that even better, but if I lived in a place and this happened, I would move. I would go to a different place. And so right now, fossil fuels are what caused this. Green energy and technology can give us cleaner air, That technology is not there yet. We cannot run our civilization on solar panels and wind and hydroelectric power, not yet, but I think we have no choice but to build the infrastructure to do it and to study it more and be invested in that kind of engineering and that kind of science, because I couldn't live with this, and people shouldn't live with that. We should want this. Okay, so an environment is everything that surrounds and influences an organism. Whoop-de-doo. So there are physical factors, which we will focus on almost exclusively in this class. The air, the quality of the air, the water, the quality of that too, the quality of the soil, the amount of sunlight, and the kind of weather you get. You can't grow food on all the surfaces on Earth. We've pretty much used every square inch of usable farmland on Earth. So if all of a sudden there's twice as many people, can we feed them? Maybe, but we're gonna have to come up with some tricks for that. And then there are biotic factors like plants and other animals. One of the things that humans may influence when it comes to biotic factors is we accidentally, or sometimes on purpose, introduce invasive species to places. A really great example, if you want to look it up, would be the cane toads in Australia, or rabbits in Australia too. Those were two really awful ideas that we had. So with that, we have environmental science, which is the study of relationships between people and their natural environment. So we will be doing, we really don't have a chapter on environmental science either. We kind of do, but we will be doing environmental science all throughout various chapters, especially our chapter on like oceanography and meteorology, but some others as well. So here's just an example of how you can see human activity. This is Pierre, South Dakota, so this is the Missouri River. Notice how the river is incredibly wide over here, and not so much over here. Why is that? Because it's been dammed. The same thing has been done to this. This is actually the Nile River right here, and the dam is built right there, so you can see how far it backs up the water. Now you get electricity from that, but dams also cause massive habitat loss by flooding the river behind it. And also, every time you build a dam, the river doesn't flow with as much water. There are actually some rivers in the world that they don't really have an ending anymore. The water eventually just kind of vanishes. It fails to flow after a while because the river's been dammed so much. So that has huge effects on the ecosystem downriver. If you can imagine that the Missouri River all of a sudden just ends right there and doesn't keep going, well, we don't know exactly what would happen. You can imagine that all the living things downriver from that maybe rely on this water would die. That would be catastrophic. Okay. Oops. So a resource is anything gathered from nature that you can use, and we build our entire civilization on natural resources. We have renewables and non-renewables that we utilize, but unless we go back to hunter-gathering societies, we can't deal without them. So renewable and non-renewable, I'm sure you understand the difference. Renewable resources would include plants and animals that we use for food, but we also use the natural fibers for clothing, and we build houses and things out of the lumber that we get from those. And for the most part, we don't really have to worry about running out of those types of things. There are some implications with animals, maybe disease or things like that maybe we can get into. But renewables, by definition, we don't have to worry about them. Non-renewables, it's tricky. Fossil fuel sources, technically they're finite, we only have so many, but current estimates, we actually have something like maybe 3,000 years of each of our fossil fuels left. Now, I seriously don't think that in 3,000 years we'll still be using them. I think the other types of technology will take over, and I think that'll be for the better. And metal ore, we're virtually in no danger of running out of any types of metals either. So we can keep expanding our electrical grids and build computers and cars out of metals, out of the ground. technically, there's only so much of it, but there's so much of it that we can't run out. And then if we look at population, so I remember when I was in like middle school, and we talked about there were 6 billion people on the planet. I was like, wow. And now it's only been 12, 15 years or so, and there's another billion people on the planet. Actually, there are 7.5 billion people, so it's almost like 1.5 billion people, which is incredible. The early 1800s was the first time ever that there were 1 billion people on the planet. So we have around 200,000 years of human beings on Earth, and our numbers were always kind of level. And then we doubled our population in the blink of an eye, and in another blink of an eye, in only 45 years, we doubled it again. So the problem might be that there are some resources that we use at a greater risk than we can hope to maintain. Not all, but some. One particular one would be groundwater. So in the United States, we looked at all that farmland. A huge portion of it is irrigated with water below the ground, and that helps farmers grow more crops to feed more people, and they make a decent living off that too. Well, that water could theoretically run out because it takes a really long time to build up groundwater, and we pump it out way faster than it collects. And then what do? We have to move on to either a different type of agriculture or a different type of diet, and perhaps those people lose their way of life. And I don't think, especially where we live, we would take that personally. So here's kind of a graph of population change. It's a little bit misleading. One thing though, see this dip where it goes down right there? That was the bubonic plague, the Black Death. We think that maybe 25% of all the people that were alive on Earth died from that. So pretty bad. Now in reality, I showed you this on the introduction video that we looked at before. The population is not going to keep going up like that. It's already starting to go down. So in reality, it's sort of, there's the Black Death, but it's gone up, 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 and now it's kind of doing this now. So I don't know what the long-term projections exactly are, but the day will, I cannot possibly see the day where there are 100 billion people, not even 50 billion people. In fact, I think around 20 billion would be the theoretical maximum for people on the planet. It's just too hard to get resources and food and to reproduce that fast. So I don't see it happening. I don't want to do that. Okay, that was a quick one.